So, welcome everyone to another episode of Notes from the Aleph. An Aleph is a high point from which all things are visible, and from our vantage point, we'll be looking at tabletop role playing games, their design, and the theory behind those designs. Around here, our motto is to be fair, build up, and have fun. I'm your host, GriffinVarro, joined by our editor Theta, our local designer Norman Rafferty, and our good friend and GM Lessons Learned. When it comes to tabletop role playing games, I have 15 years of experience running, playing, and frequently fixing problematic rule sets at the table. Pronouns are he, him, they, them. Lessons, why don't you go next?
Yes, go by Lessons Learned here on Twitch and also on YouTube. I'm a YouTuber, also a streamer. I'm streaming right now Planescape tournaments. Came
Ooh.
highly recommended due to the story. I'm crossing my fingers. So far, it's been very interesting. And I'm also a writer over Amazon. Night and Stars is the collection of short stories that I put up there into the void. And also, I dabble in game design, tabletop RPG, as well as a little bit of video game design. So a little bit of everything.
There you go. And Rafferty.
It was muted.
Hello, world. I'm Norman Rafferty, he, him. I work for Sanguine Games. So I'm at a new location today, so I'm swathed in darkness. But
Ooh, spooky.
yeah, I work for Sanguine Games. If you're in the future, you'll probably see us at the Midwest Fur Fest up in Schaumburg. So hello. And yeah, I've been working. I have been gaming for close to 40 years now. And now I've had the virtue of gaming with some of the best and some of the worst that it has to offer. And I've always had that in mind when it comes to the tabletop. Plus, also, if there's time after that, I've worked Shadiest Nights, Nibble, Iron Claw, all that kind of stuff.
There you go, then. So, for today's topic, whenever a group gets together for a game, there's usually a bunch of talk about group balance. People want to make sure that collectively all challenges can be met by at least one player and their skill base. This tends to be an expectation of the designer as well to have a fully realized party, but that's not always the choice that players make. Players will choose to make characters who are perfect at exactly one thing, or make their design choices based on integrated backstories, or create their characters in isolation and just show up with multiple characters with the exact same skill base. So today we'll be looking at that diversity of players, how players make these choices, and how we can design our games for any set of players' skills. So Rafferty, I know you were rumbling a little bit about players being able to choose whatever they want and show up with that. Why don't you go ahead and give us a start on this?
Well, I need some help here. All right, so I'm guessing none of you guys are World of Warcraft players. Is that right?
I played once back in high school with a friend who was far more obsessed than I was.
I was for many a year, and now I'm playing Star Wars: The Old Republic, which is
There you go.
an interesting change.
Is that still running?
Oh yeah,
Oh,
It's
that's
still up.
a new one. Okay, so basically, like, all right, so here's words I should be able to put fear in some people's hearts: molten core.
I think I know where this is
Now,
going.
Lessons, help us out here. Why does molten core make you laugh sardonically?
Well, Molten Core was one of the first end game or near end game instances, right? Once you reach, I think the first cap was level 60 because that was a cap, and people reached it. I go, what do we do next? It's like, okay, we're gonna go into Molten Core. It was very difficult. It was, I think, depending on the version of the story you talked about, one of the reasons was it was the largest parties, I think up to 30 people. And when you finish Molten Core, the entire server would hear about it because it was an announcement would go out like, such and such group finished Molten Core. So it was a matter of pride. But as the game grew, not only were new instances added, which made Molten Core just a thing that people just did, but also the larger groups were cut down to about half because of server issues, right? I mean, all these people running this one thing, and while everybody else is, the populations were ever growing, made a couple of decisions. So now Molten Core, and also there was the accusation that Molten Core got nerfed to encourage the new players to come in. So all these changes,
I want to talk about. So why are people saying Molten Core was nerfed? What was it before? What was it after?
Essentially, and this is still an end game in many of these games, you have to play in a very specific way, right? You have to be, everybody has a role, and everybody has to play in a very programmed kind of way. Otherwise, you can't make it because it's extra hard, right? It will wipe out entire parties, and if they make a mistake or if they pull in the wrong group, right? They go into the wrong room. The old Leroy Jenkins old meme is about that, right? Somebody going into a room and activating all the mobs and getting overwhelmed and getting killed, right?
Mhm.
So you have to do it in a series of specific ways, but newbies, as they were called, right, may have played the essentially solo game up to that point, or smaller instances, usually about 5 people, who would just kill everything that gets in your way and make sure that you kind of stick together vaguely, but did not know these higher strategies or
Right. This would be an
specific
instance the game
builds.
didn't teach them those mechanics at first.
Exactly.
And related to what we're talking today, not just mechanics, but it's also was my brief understanding, because I only tangentially familiar with this, that Molten Core didn't just, when you say strategy, a lot of people might think that's play style, but it's my understanding you needed to have a specific build with specific gear to deal with specific resistances and elemental immunities. And if you didn't have that stuff, you couldn't go to Molten Core, or you wouldn't get your butt kicked. So you had to go spend several hours kitting yourself out and retraining your character to specifically be able to take on Molten Core.
Yeah, because one of the things about Molten Core, and this is other these instances, is that they have damage over time, especially with fire. So if you don't have damage resistance to fire, as soon as you walk into Molten Core, you start taking damage and you start dying. So, my healer died because they couldn't heal fast enough. My tank died because, again, they didn't have the protections. Or you had the wrong weapons. For example, if you didn't have weapons that could overcome that, like ice damage or fire negating damage, whatever, then you couldn't do anything to the monster. And it could be a situation where you get to the first mini boss and nothing happens because you're waiting at it, it's hitting you, and they can't kill you, but you can't kill it, and it's like it's a moot point. You can't move forward because you have to kill that guy in order to progress.
Right. So let's flash forward several years, and we have the War for Azeroth expansion, and where levels are now above 80, if I'm quoting this right, because I'm sure someone will come in and say,
I think that right now they're about 120 last time I played, which was
well, right.
Ago.
Yeah, they keep going up.
Right. But now an accusation is because of issues like Molten Core, the modern end game quests, they didn't want to have that same problem where if you didn't bring the right gear or the right setups or the right outfits. So now the end game levels have to be playable for everyone, regardless of whatever they built. And there's so many class combinations and stuff that you could build. So they have to diversify. Now people are complaining that all of the end game content is very samey, because by definition it has to be, because if any of it required unique strategies that you weren't capable or even optimized for doing, you wouldn't be able to do this adventure.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, it is and isn't true. You still have to grind for gear for that level, right? So you still have to
pay extra, and they start you.
Yeah, that's
you have to now grind for a specific set of your top level gear to go and do that, and not your generic gear.
Yeah, that you still have to put some effort, but nothing compared to we are a team, we're a guild, we're gonna build a team for Molten Core, and we're gonna go and get the renown of doing Molten Core because
I'm glad you brought that up, because like I like that attitude of Molten Core used to be bragging rights because it was hard to do, but then you have to ask yourself, well, role playing game, especially a tabletop one, that's supposed to be fun, and often these games have an emphasis on the experiential. I mean, we're even seeing a pushback among D&D people saying, why does there have to be so much combat in a game where we're all fighters? So you're seeing pushback against it. Like, so in some design theory, because people read the computer games and study this, they say, well, everything we write has to be playable for whatever you brought today, regardless of what it is, whether it's an optimal build or a whatever trash fire you decided to play. And also, like, this is the thing that creeps me out. Also, if you brought a lawful good or a chaotic evil person, like whatever ethos you have, the adventure still has to be playable for anyone, regardless of whether they are a paragon of virtue or scum and villainy.
Right, you paid for the module. We have to make sure that you're able to play it with whatever it is that you want, and you could want anything.
But
Right.
here's the thing, and going back to the history of multicore and Dungeons and Dragons and similar games, is the problem of expansion. In other words, you want to keep putting more content out there, so you put more classes and more equipment and more stuff. So you are giving people the tools to create whatever they want, right? The new classes, you got your new elves, blood elves, or your cat people, or your elephant people with shotguns in space.
Classics.
You can then they can turn around and go like, oh well, this is a problem because people are going to build like pink elephants with shotguns of fire, rose petals. It's like, well, you put it in the game. It's a game. It's a
How
problem.
dare
When
they
you
use the
create
things that we wrote
you
for
put
them?
yeah,
How dare you?
you put a assassin that
then right, and then there's the attitude of should new things be more powerful so people enjoy them more, but then they'll break the game, or should they be what people want to experience? In which case, is it now a trap build? Because if we're going to go on late game adventures, you have to be powerful enough. And now we have the design problem of, well, if we let people build whatever they want, then it's not that it's this weird thing going on of we let people build whatever characters they want, but that means we can't actually sculpt a challenge to be very specific because they could have built whatever they want. So you get this weird thing going on of, because the game is more diverse, the experiences are more homogenized.
Mm-hmm.
Right, and like if we were to tie this around to more video games, I think Halo was one that like shows this off a little bit, right? Originally you would have Dooms where you would have an entire level populated with things, there'd be randomized health packs, and there'd be secrets to find. But when it comes around to Halo, the design ethos came to be, how can we go ahead and balance each individual encounter as an isolated thing, where afterwards you would regenerate your shields and be ready at the exact same point at every single encounter. We don't have to worry if the entire map is too hard. We have to worry if any individual encounter is too hard for you. So
Yeah.
that ended up in a far more homogenized experience where it's you move forward, you get to an arena, you fight there, you move forward, you get to the next arena, you fight there.
People don't realize that the original Halo is basically half a map.
Mhm.
If you play the original Halo Combat Evolved, it's just one map that you go into the map, hit the midpoint, and then you go back to mostly about the same map back. That's Halo Combat Evolved, the experience. People don't realize it.
So getting back to how this applies to tabletop, okay, so we're having this like, I worry about how the tabletop is getting kind of shaken down because like with the popularity of Dungeons and Dragons, like as we write this, we're all making fun of how there was a Cyberpunk Edge Runners event where they played D&D, which is a huge head scratcher for many reasons. But as people talk about, well, there's only one gaming experience and it's Dungeons and Dragons. And what does that mean when we say it's Dungeons and Dragons? And limiting it to monsters in boxes, like where they sit there and they wait for you to come and stab them. And where like most of the free will in the game happens during the combat, because combat is where you can choose where you're standing, you can choose where you attack, you can choose the support and abilities where you're standing. And combat is usually where the game like lets you run free. And many of these level-based games are set for that. But if you do anything outside that, if you want to do social encounters, if you want to do exploring, if you were, I know Griffin's been running Kingmaker for a while. A lot of the stuff that happens out of that is outside of your character. The speed at which you explore the wilderness is fixed. And the interactions that you have with people don't depend on you having certain prerequisites, such as nobility or social skills like diplomacy. It's based on how you talk to them and how to resolve that. It's completely divorced from anything about your characters.
Yeah.
And so it's this thing that I've been complaining about. You can do whatever you want as long as it doesn't matter, as long as it doesn't have any effect. And
if you have exactly one type of challenge, then if everyone comes to the table only ready for that one challenge, the one that matters, then of course everyone is going to be mostly the same, even if, say, one person is killing everyone with spells and another one is killing everyone with swords.
Well,
there's not a lot of material difference there.
Yeah, or on top of that, because the game has to accommodate whatever you brought today, whether it's, a reasonable person or a malefactor or full of skills or not. Because as to a comedy, that it doesn't matter what you do or what build you add. You can't be an explorer or a socializer or an achiever. None of those actually necessarily affect play. You can do those things, and I'm sure you can role play them. We'll get angry comments of people saying, well, we can role play that. But mechanically, none of that matters. And you see a pushback in that with the designs of games. Like in Dungeons and Dragons, and especially Dungeon World, which is like D&D with no pretense.
Yeah.
They've removed anything that isn't combat. They slowly remove all of it. Like D&D got rid of aristocrats, and experts as options, and now you're a dungeon delver.
At best, maybe you slap a label on it, like a background, and say, like, yes, I'm a noble. What does that let you do? Nothing.
It lets you do things.
You get to live at someone else's house for free sometimes.
Which I don't know what you're spending. Yeah, it's weird. But they have that background that says you can get away with things nobles can get away with. By the way, we're not going to suggest what those are, and if you play our adventures, they actually have no effect.
We're not going to imply that there's a system of law in place. Right?
But I think this is, if I may, I think this is a problem, and across not only games, but all media as well, which is the formula trap, where essentially from the very beginning, going to the dungeon and killing monsters or avoiding them to get the treasure was the formula. And as the formula has evolved, there's still things that we haven't done outside of the formula, right? That you still you tweak the formula, you change it, it does evolve, but you're still in that box. And anything outside of that formula, including the fact that most social interactions are not mechanized, that's also part of the formula. So you can't escape it.
And you're getting a very weird pushback now where people are annoyed there's too much combat. So you've got this weird thing of where in earlier games you might not survive the combat, and after you did it, how the aftermath of the combat, getting to the combat, getting the spoils of it, and then trucking them back home were Diablo-style issues. You only had so much bag space. That's not even an issue anymore. Now it's go to places, get in fights, and experience things. And it's this weird thing of where... I really want to get the crux of the matter is it's one thing to say that we award players for making diverse characters, but I think that what we need to see more responses in the games is instead of nerfing everything, instead of nerfing Molten Core and Azeroth campaign materials to bring whatever you want, it doesn't matter, the adventure plays out exactly the same way, regardless of what you brought. It should be there's an obstacle in front of you, and there should be a variety of ways to deal with it. And how you deal with it will also change the outcome of how you deal with it, and see that kind of responses. Now, I realize that a lot of gamers just want to show up and go on a raid and have fun and kill stuff. But I'm always asking the question, well, we could just go play Destiny. We could play a computer game that will do this, and we'll always have the same outcome, and I won't have to argue with anybody what rules mean or whether my build is viable or not. Because
you'll still have that argument in Destiny.
Yeah.
Well,
but the argument occurs outside of the
gaming.
game itself, though. It happens in forums and stuff like that.
Interpretation of a rule.
Yeah.
It's like you push a button and bullets come out. We're done. I won't have to argue about what that actually means. Yes, you still have those arguments, but that's what I'm getting at. To some extent, if I just wanted to play a linear experiential experience, I could do that in a video game. And if I wanted to have a social experience, where people validate my kind of character, why are we playing? People are asking that question about D&D. It's like, if I was here to be social or to build a diverse character that has a lot of unique things about them, the combat's getting in the way of that because combat's not what I'm here for. So I hear people saying, well, why don't we get rid of the combat? What are you replacing that with? Like how
is there much of a structure left in many games for that?
Right. Now, bringing it back to video games a little bit, there's a discussion in video games about, a confusion, I would say. There's a discussion about video games about accessibility, which is kind of similar to what we're talking about, right? And a lot of this stuff is, color blindness and making sure that you have audio levels and even be able to tweak difficulties, like, you put in sliders, stuff like that. But there's also an aspect which I repulses me, which is what I call the story mode syndrome, which now many video games have hard, average, and story mode. And the message the story mode sends, and literally this is just cut and paste. You can play dozens of games and they will literally have the same description. This is for players who want to enjoy the story and don't want to worry about the combat. And my question is, okay, so you're telling me that you put a mode in your game that it basically means that your players don't play the game. Because if your game is combat, if that's a core mechanic, then, and you don't want to engage in the combat, then you don't want to play the game.
Well, we are living in this era. I mean, we're streaming right now.
Yeah.
We are living in this era where a lot of people want to experience the game, often with other people, but they don't actually want to push the buttons. And speaking as someone who watches a lot of streamed video games, there are games that I wouldn't want to play. Like, there are people who are way better at Resident Evil than I will ever be.
Yeah, but that's, I mean, that's an alternative. Like, you want to watch someone else, the performance, and we talked about performative play in the past, of playing the game, that's one thing, right? It's like my differentiation between audiobooks and reading the book, right? It's like, if I want to read the book, I read the book. If I want somebody to tell me about the book, then I, see a performance of the book, right?
Think it's story mode isn't just watching the FMVs. Story mode is often like where they've taken the difficulty of the game and dialed it way down.
Well, but the point is that the idea behind it is like, okay, you want to go from one cutscene to the next. We don't want the combat to get in the way of that. Now, if your game core mechanic is combat, essentially you're not playing the game. You're not engaging with the core, right? You're not playing the game.
Yeah, I'm also talking about the setup, the comedy setup that we should probably get the link to that. There was a stand-up comedian who was joking about Grand Theft Auto. Like, he bought Grand Theft Auto because he wanted to play it and experience the content. So he didn't know why he had to go through all these stupid escort missions or puzzles to unlock more content. He said, I paid, my 60 quid here. I should be allowed to see everything. And I know he's exaggerating for comic effect, but I think, there's, some validation to that experience. I mean, I'm kind of taking the opposite tack to this with that's a problem. But the problem that I thought our diversity would address today is more like, if the game promises me, like if the game is promising me, you can make the kind of character you want to see in the world. Like, everyone's promising that. We're seeing huge statements in the modern gaming of, like, it's not even just you can only play dwarves and elves anymore. Play kobolds.
This is the ultimate role-playing game.
Yeah, but play whatever you want. Be whatever you want. Realize your dreams. Make up all sorts of things about your appearance and countenance and all that stuff. Do whatever. And it's like, okay, I'm with you. But the impression I keep getting is you can make all of these choices, but none of these choices actually matter. It's only being and not doing. When you're leveling up and you have a choice between, abilities, they're often just combat stuff. And now we're nerfing combat. Like, if you're playing a skill-based game like a Vampire or Iron Claw or something like that, you would have the option of, I could buy increased social abilities, I could buy increased athletic abilities, increased senses, or other, bizarre abilities that reach in time and space. But why have those as selling points that they exist in the game if we're also sculpting the game to where you can still plow through all of the threats with a default character? These aren't going to enable you or unlock new content or change the narrative flow. They're not going to do any of that.
Well, I think it goes back to the idea of selling. It's a question of the mechanics versus the commercial aspect. I can't make a very popular game if I don't appeal to as many people as possible. So I have to nerf it in order to make sure that everybody can at least be willing to pay the entry fee, right? Because once I get their money, yeah. In many ways, it is, because if I were to say to go to all those people, to video game players, like, listen, this game is about you shooting aliens in the face. All the people who say, well, I want to play for the story, they're like, well, that's not for me, because I want to see, this romance, or I want to see these voice actors that I like do the character thing and the animation. So what do you got for me? It's like, oh well, the compromise is I could make a a visual novel about Mass Effect and charge you $20, or I can make Mass Effect with 40, 60, 80 hours of combat and charge you $70
Well, but I
plus
think
DLC, right?
So
I
to
don't
go
want
ahead
to
and like refocus this for a
yeah,
second, let's
tabletop.
Okay, go
focus
ahead, yeah.
over at Vampire real quick, where I think you made a good point that you could get a whole bunch of cool different things in that. And when we look at the design of how Vampire is, it basically tells you very much up front what type of characters you should be thinking about playing, because it says up front you have 3 different things you can make a priority, and you're choosing one of them to be your best thing. Are you going to be physical, mental, or social? And so, as far as design goes, I think it definitely signposts very well what you should expect to be doing and what, as a player, you should expect other people to probably be able to fill in as.
There's also like Vampire, the written material for it. Like I like to see some people who had more and frankly better experiences than I've had with
Mhm.
Vampire, because a lot of the written material, I've complained in the past. Vampire is the masquerade, but a lot of the written material are let's go do something. Let's go to a house that's infested with ghosts, or let's go beat up werewolves, or let's go beat up vampires. And so we're just turning it into it's just another dungeon. It's just go to a place with monsters and boxes and deal with them, rather than the challenges of, if you're vampires in a social context, there's territorial rights. Who gets to farm blood here? Who gets to be money here? Who gets to sire new vampires and who doesn't?
Oh yeah,
Like who's top boss here? Like because you're also running. You have money in enterprises, which is difficult because you're dead. So anything you're running has to be some sort of criminal enterprise run through proxies. So
right, right.
there's that
Yeah,
kind of
but
And
that actually did happen, and it was called LARPing, the LARPing side of the Vampire the Market Masquerade,
And that
well,
definitely seems to be why people like it. But like at the tabletop, you're right, and I
but
think
not
there's
a
definitely
tabletop.
two
Yeah,
two parts to it. The first is that maybe a lot of people don't have their fingers on other occult things, and so they kind of like they shove it all into the same bundle, really, which is understandable. You want to get it all out of your system. The other
right.
part would be, geez, I already forgot what that was.
Well, I was going to mention like there's also the you also don't want to tell people that they can, like I keep saying, do whatever you want as long as it doesn't matter. You could be playing a vampire game and buy all sorts of super physical abilities and super mind control. If you like mind
Yep.
control, I got a game for you. But then when you actually try to exert those abilities to modify the storyline or get stuff done, you might often find out that the adventures are pre-scripted. Oh no, this guy's more powerful than you, or this is a monster that's immune to that. In other words, you have all those cool abilities, but they actually don't matter. I mean, I'm glad Lessons brought up the idea of LARPing. LARPing is almost always a sort of being experience instead of doing. It's showing up, sussing out other people's characters, getting to role play with other people, and learning what they're on about. There often are programmed events and that kind of thing. Those are a better example of this, and those are big community events that are often moderated outcome to have different outcomes, like because those guys know what they're doing. Camarilla knows where it's at.
yeah.
It's the tabletop stuff that I'm seeing where there's a lot of written adventures that are designed to be easy on the game master. I mean, I'm tolerant of that, but they don't have a lot of provisions in the text for this might go 2 or 3 different ways.
Yeah.
Instead, they'll often nerf the encounters. You'll see this in D&D too. These walls are teleport proof. This monster can only be defeated by this. You'll run into GMs who have an attitude that if they go off script, I have to get them back on script. This
Right,
is
the on and off script thing is definitely
Yeah.
a part of writing the modules too, and I think we like discussed like a little bit about designing games with that kind of railroading, or like how to deal with that kind of stuff.
well,
And
but
yeah,
you're also seeing this in the game design itself. Like Blades in the Dark and Dungeon World are very aggressive about staying on script. It's built into the game that you like form a posture before you go on the adventure. You pick a posture to do with it. Blades in the Dark is angry that you might even prepare. It's like, preparing wounds your character. You suffer stress. Just do what's in front of you, deal with that, then do the aftermath, and then deal what's in front of you again. So they're kind of like, very much. I mean, on the one hand, I praise them for having that structure of do it and play out the aftermath and that kind of thing. But they also have don't be too weird about these things. Don't build a character. Don't try to do weird stuff that takes you off script, which kind of gets away from our diversity thing of the games are also very much scripted. You can't be weird. I mean, Dungeon World crunches Dungeons and Dragons weirdness down into an extremely narrow box, which is why it's quick to run and quick to play, but you're also not doing anything. You also see this in the OSR. Like, I know people love Morkborg, but OSR games like that crunch your options down to where you're just a killer in a box, so they don't have to worry about you being diverse and going off script.
Yeah, but one of the things about especially Blades in the Dark, ironically, I found that because, and this I think is also part of the question is, what do we mechanize? Dungeons & Dragons only mechanizes combat and has very little to do everything else, right? So that's part of the problem. But Blades in the Dark kind of mechanizes everything. So having that moment, for example, if I'm playing something like Shadowrun or Cyberpunk, where I just sit around and we do the planning, that's also mechanized. And my experience is, and maybe just it may take time.
I got to get used to it. Well, sorry, go ahead. Never mind. Go.
I may be that my experiences are not extensive enough to see beyond my first impressions. Is that I feel very much in a box. Like, shouldn't we just sit around and talk about this? That's part of the fun, right? Part of the interaction of, okay, I go do this and you do that. It's like, no, you check this box and use this ability and you get the information. And, it's like you're going from one box to the next because everything or almost everything gets mechanized. And it was like, where's the role playing here since I don't get the planning section and I don't get the...
Right. If I were to classify Blades in the Dark, it's definitely far more like a board game, but a board game where you don't need to set anything up ahead of time.
I mean, I know you can be more diverse, but I'm like, speaking of like Shadowrun and Blades in the Dark, it's actually the opposite problem. They're not mechanized enough. Like, my biggest complaint about those games is how wishy-washy society is. Blades in the Dark, it has the opposite of explaining law and criminality. Like they've gone out of their way to not explain it. Apparently there's property and corporations, and somehow there's money. All of these are things that exist, but there's also a police that can arrest you for anything you want at any time. Related to Shadowrun ostensibly takes place in the real world, but they also sell you rocket launchers over the counter. Yeah. And hacking is freely available to anyone. In Shadowrun, you can't just be arrested on the street and thrown in jail for possession or assault. That doesn't happen because, once again, it's a gaming experience.
Right. It's the right libertarian hellscape.
Right. It's the thing I always complain about. It's Shadowrun. The game where you run in the shadows. By the way, we can walk around the streets with our rocket launchers and assault rifles.
Well, you do need a license for it.
And not be shot on sight because we're minority. Getting away from that, it's that's why I talk about, like, you can do whatever you want as long as you're still in your box, and that's the kind of thing I'm complaining about. Which is, I think it's cool that people can play diverse characters and do kind of stuff, but I also I'm annoyed at a lot of these games. You saw this develop in the late 2000s when people. It's the paradox of this where people said we have free will now because D&D 3rd edition gave us more customizable than anything. And this paradoxically developed the trap theory, because I didn't see this until then. The theory that I could make choices, but they were actually put there to make me weaker or make me less effective and ruin my character. And that sort of toxicity that built around the idea that diversity might be bad, like I might be buying the wrong things, and you still see that.
Which is thus the invention of like all the build boards, where just like, well, you want to build exactly in this way to be the most optimal one ever.
Yeah,
right. And that's why I'm complaining that the games responded to that by removing the ability to build a trap character, and by removing the ability to build a trap character, we've removed diversity from the game. You can't not be a killer in Dungeons and Dragons or Pathfinder. You will be a murderer today.
Right, and if it's straightforward, acknowledge that you are here to go kill stuff, and we're giving you the choices to be the most effective killer, that'd be great. But again, like you keep saying, people are getting annoyed by the fact that there's combat in the Dungeons and Dragons game.
They want to do other things with it, but then they're going to run into the problem of, well, yes, but you can't actually be good at other things. The only thing we we formatted in the game was killing. So while you could do other things with it, you basically bought a game to tell you how to do how to have a story experience, and now you're doing all the story experiences that we didn't tell you how to do.
I mean, it's the charisma is a dump stat problem, right? It's like of the five of them are all about combat. It's how strong I am, how fast I am, how much hits I can take, how many spells I can have so I can kill stuff, and how many other spells I can have so I can kill stuff and heal and keep on going. And then
So
charisma, which is everything else.
Right. So while we're talking about like games entirely oriented combat, let's talk about the combat monster for a second. So when we talk about like diversity of players, we're also kind of talking about diversity of challenges that the game presents to you. And there's always kind of maybe a person out there who goes, I want to be able to succeed at this particular challenge no matter what. Uh, how do you guys feel about that in terms of like the group of players at your table having a bunch of diverse builds, but one person says they just do not want this challenge to ever exist?
Mm, I I mean,
Which
I've
could
spread
very well be
myself.
a combat thing, or it could be someone who's great at talking with literally everyone and basically mind controls them, or it could be someone who invents a solution to your problem every 12 seconds.
Well, I think that's a problem of mechanics.
Hmm.
Not I used to think of it as a problem of players, but playing with from people here, I've learned the lessons like, no, if the mechanics gives you the chance to be effortless, right? Gives you things like magic numbers where I can hit a specific number and then after that, there's no challenge. That's the system, right? You
Hmm.
can build a system where there's always a modicum of challenge, right? Maybe it's easier, maybe it's harder, but there's a modicum of challenge. But if you create a system where the numbers pile up, you can't blame the player for saying, well, I have to be effective. So if I have 25 on my rolls to charisma, I should be able to
Yeah.
talk
Why,
to
why did
everybody,
Right.
you
right?
why did you
You
tell
know,
me I could do this, and then when I do it, yell at me for doing it?
Right, because the
Mhm.
game is supposed to be at least slightly aspirational, a lot of these ones, right?
Well,
You want to
but
be able to say, I can grow into being good enough to mitigate the challenge, or that I am at least at one thing.
well, it's like, but I mean, like even then, like I'm always complaining about Dungeons and Dragons charm person. Like a lot of people, you know, would complain about you shouldn't rob a character of their agency. Charm person isn't just an ability in Dungeons and Dragons. It's a first level ability in Dungeons and Dragons, and they gave it to like all the spellcasters. It's not just
Yep.
bards, wizards, and clerics can all do it. So it's this weird thing of, we gave it to you as an ability. And so if a player picked it off of the list and then did it, you'd have to ask, like, oh man, you took away that person's, you did terrible things to that person, took away their agency. It's like, well, I could have killed them. But
no, oh, and
also,
that
well, go
and
ahead.
now, of course, if you do it, the person knows that you did it and gets angry with you, which
Well, they
it's a nerf. It's a like, okay, so why should I try if I
they
really
still
convince this
kind of,
person to be my best person, my best friend? Why they're angry with me
well,
now
but
that they
I'm using it
understand?
as an example. There's all
Yeah.
kinds of special abilities in the game, even if we didn't min-max the character.
Mhm.
My usual
That
complaint
obviates challenges.
Right. My usual complaint about the Dungeons and Dragons is like when we say, well, we need to get in here, I'll use Stone Shape to destroy the wall. It's a spell in the
Mhm.
book, and I memorized
Yeah.
it today. And like, well, this wall is somehow proof against that, or something like, or there's no provisions for that. There's also, oh my God, the number amulet of non-detection is like the biggest bullshit ever because it's like they give you all these spells to detect things, except every enemy is detection proof. I mean, like I said, that's nerfing right there. It's telling you
Mhm.
you can do this, giving you the ability. Then something else in the text says, "Well, we have to make sure it doesn't work." What was the point? Like,
Mhm.
if I have these special abilities but they don't work? But flipping this kind of around, what we're originally talking about, which is you can still plow through it no matter what you built. Like I know what Griffin's asking is like, well, how do we deal with the pro from Dover? And the answer is, well, you've got like 3, 4, 5 players in the party
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
for some reason, you told everybody they weren't allowed to buy the same things. You said, we can't have a second wizard in the party.
We
You'll
can't
have
have
to be
four
something.
fighters in the group.
Right. You had to be something different. And the almost every game, the classes are set up. If you're playing a class based game, the classes are set up so they are not allowed to step on each other. So you're
Mhm.
going to have one person who's good at fighting and one person who's good at spellcasting. You're going to get that. And you also, if you're doing the session 0 that we talked about, you're going to get that. If you're going to tell your players you can't all build the same thing, one of your players is going to be really good at it. And if you don't let them rock and roll because they're really good at it, you wasted their time. You told them you were only allowed to be one thing. By the way, the one thing you are doesn't matter.
Yeah.
But I'm more upset about the idea of the ability to fail. It would be like if you came up to a challenge that none of you were built to actually do. Like if there was a diplomacy required and all of you had made charisma your dumb stat, or all of you were chaotic evil warlocks, horrible goblin people who, don't, who can't actually do any of this. Like if a challenge came up that you were ill-suited to do. Now, and that's where, like, I know the philosophy of failing forward came from. The idea that even though we can't pass the library use roll to find the evil book to stop Cthulhu, if we all fail the roll, the adventure just stops. Which is a weird thing.
You could fail the game, right?
Well, I mean, yeah, that's a weird.
Yeah, but the problem I think there is that it's trying to overcome the idea of a single a single fault adventure, where if you reach that point and you don't pass, it's all over because everything hinges on that one. So it's a single fault. As opposed to actually
you don't progress a character in the middle of the game to get better at it to do it.
Yeah,
right,
you don't get options.
I mean, the problem I have with that is, but that has the subtext to it that since we've agreed that can never happen, it could never happen that any build I bring could fail at the task that's ahead, then none of my builds actually matter because there's no point where I could prepare for something like, and I guess we're seeing this now that I think about this, why we're seeing the preparation phase disappear in gaming. There's no need to prepare. You can't fail to overcome anything. So there's no preparation phase. And also the exact build, the way you tweak your numbers doesn't actually matter. So just get in there and have fun. And when I say it like that, it's like I sound like the biggest asshole in the world. It's kind of like, wait, people just want to get in there and have fun? What's this? But it's more like, why was the game putting this like obstacle in front of me of making me sweat my choices? Like,
it's you going to the video game example is when you have a dialogue option where it's like, yeah, yes, okay, sure, right? They're all the same and they all get you to the same point, but they're slightly different flavored of that choice, which you can pick whatever.
Right, it's zero diversity by way of nothing mattered.
Yeah, a false choice dilemma, basically.
Yeah,
we'll get to that next time.
Well, but I think the way I nailed it was the weird paradox of, for some reason you can die in a combat, but you can't die anywhere else. The thing I mentioned before is, if we all had to fight a monster to get into the library and the monster TPK'd us, everyone would go, that's what Mafia is.
I think also we're thinking about, you can have a situation where you have, and should be acceptable to have, short-term failure versus long-term, success. In other words, yes, you should have a game that is balanced where you do have failures, and failures should be a point where, okay, you failed because you can't do this. But it shouldn't be, we want to avoid the situation where the entire campaign ends because, you kill that one character. Like in a video game where if you're giving choice to kill any NPC, it's like, well, yeah, kill this NPC so I can't progress because I killed them. And now that person
the threat of fate has been severed.
Yeah,
but see, here's the weird problem. It's like in a computer game, if you fail at something, you almost always go back to a previous checkpoint. Like they rewind time.
Yeah.
So if I wander back into the room, to get the quest, time has been rewound to where everyone talks to me like I've never been there before.
Right, but usually you don't retcon an entire adventure.
Right, whereas in tabletop gaming, they don't do that. In tabletop gaming, time moves forward. And it's also like, and this is also explaining the big, issue in the room, which is, if we can't fail at saving the world, are we really saving the world? Like, if it's already scripted that no matter how terrible we are at this, and how many bad rolls and bad choices we make, that we can't actually let the world die, then are we really saving it?
here's what I'm saying about long-term success. It's like if you can fail to save the world, do you have an option of playing the post-apocalyptic world after?
You could also start. You could just have the world destroyed and start a new campaign. It's not
That too.
Imagine the
Yeah.
poor GM though, with his module path in hand, and he goes, "All right, you're going to fight the wizard. You're charging in head first. Wait a second, you all just walked away. What the hell do I do now?" It doesn't say anything about that.
Well,
Yeah, but that goes back to the whole script thing where you expect it to follow the script, right?
Mhm,
The
mhm.
expectation of the GM is that he has a script and the players are supposed to play the characters per the script. When they walk away, it's like, oh, you don't want to be on my prepared stage, which brings a whole lot of other questions about why they're playing there.
Getting into that's why I talk about
Yeah.
the formative play and the Mercer effect. It's
Mhm,
kind of like
yeah.
if we're here to be entertaining and entertaining to each other, whereas the script is pretty linear, we're being entertaining and we're using random elements to add emergence, unexpected ideas that might go off into a different thread. That's definitely a form of play where the director is very strong, and our goal there is to be entertaining, which
Mhm.
I don't think is bad, and I think could be really good. But also, a performative game is also very sculpted. You're not allowed to play whatever you want. You can only be as diverse as the director and the story will dictate. And in a performative game, if the GM told those players stop doing that and do this instead, they would, because otherwise they would be fired, not getting paid anymore. So,
in some cases, divorce.
into that kind of experience, expecting, but that's when we're getting away from role playing as game and role playing as story, where people it would be better for the story if you went on to the next thing. And that's where I would also flip this around saying, a story where people succeed even though they don't have the right abilities or to do it is what we call a unbelievable story, which we then usually call a bad story.
Yeah, it's the difference between earning your happy ending and just getting the happy ending.
Right.
If people just get the happy ending, it's like, well, why did I?
Well, or also like, how does this asshole keep succeeding at everything?
Well, you see, at the end, you just wrap it up and say that they succeeded because of the power of friendship, like every movie.
Well, I mean, the one I wanted to point
or
out,
family.
The big one I always want to point out is Harry Potter. Let's come out with Harry, because Harry Potter just gets all the way to the end. Everyone keeps saying how important Harry is, and they keep and it's not that he doesn't do anything, but so much of it are people like breaking the rules, bending the rules, and just letting.
And a lot of his success is literally someone else already succeeded for him.
Yeah, they just let him get all the way to the end. And I'm not saying Harry Potter's not a great read or a great movie to watch, but Harry Potter doesn't have a lot of agency or a lot of skill or overcoming a lot of this by himself. So
that is actually a good part of the text, though, where Harry is often like, "Wait a second, hold up, I'm a bit of an imposter, aren't I? I've done nothing to be famous." He literally just straight up grills himself on it half the time.
He
is at least conscious.
He is conscious of how he rises to power, but once again,
but he still does.
I mean, like, I feel like I'm breaking this also gets back to one of the issues I say of the problem you're not having is not a problem. It's if the players are enjoying themselves and don't notice that the game is bending in their favor, or if they expect this. Like, I've had players who expected to fail forward. That's why I keep bringing up the Naughty Dog rule. Like, I've had players who expected, like, well, sure, I kill everyone I meet, but if the bad guys reduced me to 0 hit points, they take me hostage.
Right. So let's talk about the fail nowhere real quick. Where we have our party of diverse characters, but they are actually missing libraries, or they are missing X. What should be done to solve this? Should everyone be able to read the library anyway, which would be the fail forward access, or is there some other solution to it other than they all fail because they didn't have the answer before the game started?
I gotta cut you off right there because people would yell at me if I said that was what fail forward was, because I'm often saying
fair.
Fail forward is supposed to fail forward. People would tell you the proper ethos of fail forward is you make forward progress, but not in an ideal way. Something happens to you that you didn't want to happen. Like, you make some kind of sacrifice. Like, you climb the cliff, but your rope breaks, I think, or you pick the lock, but your lock picks break. That kind of thing. Are we live?
Hey,
We're live.
everybody. We had a momentary little blip there, but we're going to go ahead and get some concluding points in now on all this topic. So, Rafferty, you had something positive to say, which is
I have something
amazing.
positive to say. Like I remember when the D&D 4 skill challenges came out, which were trying to make failure interesting. But as I've caused and complained, you can't. They only spent a page and a half on it out of like 400, and
Which
it
is
didn't.
unfortunate because I found it exciting too.
Yeah.
The adventures did a much better job of it, where the adventures explained if you fail doing this, then that happens to you. And I really enjoyed that because that was some out of the box thinking that I'm disappointed disappeared. Like everyone hates skill challenges, back to linear. The other positive I saw on that front was Powered by the Apocalypse codified the idea of the countdown. They doomsday clock, whatever you want to call it. I'm going to call it a countdown because it runs out, and when it runs out, something bad happens. Blades in the Dark added the idea that it could move at variable speeds, or clarified it could be a certain number. The games I've written says, okay, drop 10 or 9 or 1 for every player and take 1 away every time something bad happens, or every time a story beat happens. And you'll also see that in Chronicles of Darkness, which has story beats. Now there was the idea that instead of killing all the player characters, we had the concrete idea of if you're not making progress fast enough, then the clock runs out. And the buffer you could have for players being diverse, as in having weird abilities that might not apply, you could just say, well, you guys are going to burn through the clock faster. You'll just burn through the clock faster. You'll have to do less bullshit, knuckle down, or find ways you can add time, or the way your uniqueness can help you get to the end of this.
Right. And I think on the same point, that's also why stress is there, where you can spend a resource in order to do the same thing. You actually have a countdown on how long you can bullshit through it.
In theory, I could talk about
in theory.
Wicked Ones handles that a little bit. But yeah, the other idea was that this shows up in our games. Like in our games like Iron Claw, we would put in the personality gift, which would be, look, find some way to make your weirdness relate to this problem, and we'll give you a bonus to your roll. And my worry is I don't think that goes far enough. But the idea of exhausting players, something you used to see in the old school games, was like the wilderness encounters to get to the dungeon weren't supposed to kill you. The wilderness encounters on there are attrition. You'll lose hit points. You'll lose spells, which could take weeks to recover.
You'll run out of food, maybe.
You'll run out of food or run out of henchmen. Losing henchmen means you can carry less treasure back. So it's a question of how much attrition you have on the way there and on the way back. But the idea of exhaustion and attrition, that's why I'm glad countdowns are back, because the idea of attrition has disappeared from gaming. Everything is, okay, we come back the next day, all the numbers are recharged, because players were complaining that if we were at anything less than 100, we wouldn't work. Or the computer games bias you that way. You just teleport back down to town, take a nap, everything's at 100% again. And the idea of
portals.
Yeah, the idea of attrition is the idea of loss. I'm glad to see that coming back into the tabletop. And that, I think, that is where you can reward people for being diverse, is you can show them you could still get through this, but you're going to deplete more resources or deplete more time doing it. But
than if you were a specialist.
And the important thing is, when the countdown runs out, something bad that nobody likes has to happen. And that, I think that's I understand some people will be bummed out that they kind of lost, but on the other hand, we might see the opposite problem. We might see a challenge that players just blaze through because their characters or their unique abilities or the way they describe it beats through all of the challenges way faster or ways that GM didn't expect. And I know a lot of people will say, like, well, I guess that's I mentioned this in a previous one. I've met players under the theory that if the players had a plan, had the resources, and made all the die rolls, that's bad. Because it wasn't a challenge. And to me, that's incredibly weird. If we were lucky, we were planning, and we were doing exactly what we thought was a good idea, all 3 of those, yeah, everything should work. Like, boom.
That
Yeah, it would
that's
be disingenuous, right?
no, I think
Well,
that's a
no,
lessons.
misplacement of challenge. Because the idea that you plan is that you know that it's going to be a challenge, and the challenge is coming up with a plan that will make you, have odds more on your side. Otherwise, if you don't have to plan, like in the wilderness, like you have to plan for food and water and all that, then that means that you have removed the challenge, right? And part of the confronting the challenge is the planning and the thing. Seems, yeah, you have to make sure that maybe a roll is going to go bad and maybe you didn't foresee something,
well,
but that's part of the formula.
So let's
well,
go
it's
ahead and get some ending statements then.
yeah, well,
Yes.
maybe, but I just want to like add to that real quick. It's that weird thing going on of where apparently fun is being bad at our jobs because like it's that weird thing of if we actually built our characters or had abilities that could overcome this easily, that would be considered less fun, which is very weird in this era where we consciously choose our abilities. Like today, our characters are way less random than they used to be, and I think we should be celebrating that. We, that sort of thing, because it actually makes things matter. If some things we breeze through and some things we can't, that's the way we are.
Mhm.
All right then. Lessons. Do you have anything you want to add to that and end off on?
I think I'm going to go back to the idea of design and popularity and the marketing, right? A lot of these problems go, okay, we want to make a game this way for various reasons, but we also have to sell that game to as many people as possible. And a lot of this stuff is just at best compromises. Like we don't want to cut our nose in spite of our face. You still end up doing it at some level. It's just that again, if people don't notice, then you can skate through, but you will notice when the next edition of the game comes out because all the things that you were happy about the current edition that the designer thought were a problem, they will try to fix and make you angry about it, the process, until it becomes a more popular edition and you go back to the same cycle. But that's a discussion for another day.
That's right, Rafferty. You're just here to make people angry, right?
Well, I mean, at
We're
some
just
level,
teasing.
the game has to take a position
Mhm.
about stuff. Like I know there's a lot of discourse now about, should orcs be inherently evil? And the problem was because they had a problem where I keep going back to the Naughty Dog problem. They wanted bad guys who were bad guys and you could feel good about killing them. But they also don't want to take a stance on what good and bad are because someone out there might get mad at you for saying this kind of thing is bad. And I mean that's the opposite of diversity. Making everything homogenized paste is the opposite of making the game have divergent points of view.
And I think that's probably a good point to end off on. Just keep being weird, everybody. Keep Portland weird. So, I think that's going to be it for this episode of Notes from the Aleph. We have stream episodes bi-weekly, Fridays at 2 p.m. Eastern. You can join us live at Twitch at twitch.tv/Ractus. We also stream and record weekly tabletop games on the same channel. Over on Wednesdays, Sundays, and Wednesdays. Norm Rafferty here is a partner driver for Sanguine Games. Check out sanguinegames.com and join them on the Reddit and Twitter and look forward to the upcoming Book of Corals Ironclaw expansion book. And of course, be sure to join Lessons Learned here at Lessons Learned 1 on Twitch and check out some of his videos over on YouTube as well. For right now, be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and come see us all again. See you next time, everybody.